Hiya, as I'm walking along, I'm just thinking about a film I watched last night, which I thought I'd share a few thoughts on off the top of my head, which was The House That Jack Built by Lars von Trier, starring Matt Dillon as a serial killer with OCD, which I liked, the idea of that. It's an underused and underexplored area of films, I think. The idea of, you know, people who are involved in that sort of line of work not like being freaked out by the idea of mess. And of course, being a serial killer, you can leave a lot of mess. And that's a big aspect of being a serial killer. So I love the idea that there's this guy who's a clean freak and he has to cope with all the mess that he leaves. No wonder that he chooses strangulation a lot, which I guess is a very clean way of killing. But anyway, so what was the film like? Well, as many of you will know, Lars von Trier is a very notorious director who has courted controversy in the past and been offensive, I should say, has offended people with the approach he takes with films. I did a review of Antichrist, a quite in-depth review a few years ago on this show, and I thought the film was really quite good and acknowledged that yes, it's got a great deal of shocking aspects to it, and yet there's lots to recommend. And I'd say the same thing with The House That Jack Built. Is it offensive? Well, yeah, it's about people killing people. Is it shocking and misogynistic? Yes, in a big way. And I would definitely tell people, you know, if you're of a squeamish disposition, do not watch the film because it's just way too intense in places and crosses certain lines that I think for your kind of average viewer, I think they'd struggle with. However, if you're a more or less knee-jerk reaction type of person and you were willing to give this film a try and you can cope with extreme violence, you'll actually find it quite an interesting film. In some ways a deliberately annoying film, a film that is trying to sort of grab you and go, yes, aren't I horrible, aren't I a bad person, and a deliberate sense of shock, pondering in places on the kind of artistic nature of architecture and art itself. And of course Matt Dillon is a killer who decides to treat his murders as art. That's not a particularly new idea, but certainly this film explores that in more elaborate depth. There's a great, like, there's a sort of this insistence in the film that murder can be sophisticated. The actual serial killer's name, Matt Dillon's moniker as a serial killer, is Mr. Sophistication. And I quite like this idea of like a murderer being so psychopathic and so out of touch that he should see what he's doing as a kind of a higher form of living, which many psychopaths do think that. There's a really, really good line in the film at one point, as I recall, where he says something like, you know, what was it? It was something to do with, I don't know a lot about the decompositions of bodies and the science behind that, but I've always been an expert in dessert wine. I'm sure he says something like that, and that just made me chuckle, this idea of, you know, but hey, I might be a killer, but hey, I know a little bit about wine, so that makes me okay. Now, the film does explore psychopathy really interestingly, and it does something that actually I wonder if it was ripped off from a comment that I heard Nicole Kidman say once. Nicole Kidman played a psychopath in a film called The Human Stain with Anthony Hopkins, I think, and because she was a psychopath, she asked for some advice from a doctor or somebody who knew about psychopathy, and they told her, well, the way to understand a psychopath is imagine that a psychopath sees a car crash or an accident, and they see a poor woman who's lost a loved one in the accident and she is screaming and crying. What you and I would do as an empath, you know, people who have empathy, we would look at that and be horrified, and we'd be instantly in touch with the emotions of that. But for a psychopath, they would go home and they would look in the mirror and they would try and simulate the emotions that they saw. So they would scream in the mirror like the woman was screaming. And I've always remembered that as a chilling idea of what psychopathy could be. And it's in this film. You see Matt Dillon at one point, and he deliberately is putting pictures of people so he can not only mimic emotions, so he can sort of take advantage of people, but that he can simply learn about a subject that he has no idea what it is, and that is killing people. Sorry, that is the emotions of people when he kills them, or indeed the emotions of people just in general. And so that was a particularly kind of chilling moment, I thought, and an interesting one. Sorry, I'm doing this on the move. I'm on my way to a barbecue and got the urge to talk about this film. Anyway, there are some moments in the film that I had my sort of head in my hands, sort of going like, no, no, no. So it is very brutal. And I think there might have been a time in my life when I would have looked at this film and thought, this is glorifying murder. I remember I actually thought that about Natural Born Killers when I first saw it. I think I'd been a Christian for a little while, and I looked at it and I thought, this is dangerous, this is dangerous. It is possible for a viewer to have seen The House That Jack Built and feels like it kind of, well, it doesn't glorify murder perhaps, but it kind of like makes it seem mundane or a perfectly reasonable life choice. That sort of stuff I'm not keen on, because I think murder is terrible. But I think most thoughtful people are going to look at this and see it for what it is, which is a piece of art that explores what it's like for a person to have no empathy in the world. And watching this as viewers, I think, you know, if a viewer's going to watch this and they are psychopaths themselves, I don't really think they're going to see this as an excuse to do what they're going to do, because they're probably going to do that anyway. I don't think they're going to necessarily empathize with Matt Dillon and think there's a hero that I can follow, because again, I don't think that's how people's minds works when they're a psychopath. Not that I know much about this topic. So I think to say that it's a fully dangerous film is maybe pushing the button too high on it. It's not that bad. In fact, I found, apart from a couple of scenes, there's two in particular that push the boundaries, I would say. Apart from those two scenes, I actually found the film not that offensive. There's an interesting exploration at the end. Lars von Trier is very interested in religion and seems to explore it with a sort of wink in his eye while he does it. But he does explore the themes of religion, and I just do find that interesting how, you know, it remains a topic that directors explore. Particularly, I think there's loads of like famous directors who we revere today, classic directors, Hitchcock, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese. All of their work has been offensive in some ways, but actually what it has also done is it has explored human evil while putting it in the context of religion. And I just find that interesting, that the idea of religion still kind of haunts our culture. It still is part of our frame of reference. And I think The House That Jack Built does that. Is it a great film? I wouldn't say it's as sort of thematically pure as Antichrist was. I think Antichrist has, of course, also had its shocking elements too. Is it a film that should be banned? No, absolutely not. We are adults. I'm not going to show it to my 7-year-old, but is it a film that is worthy of classic status? I just don't know. I'm not sure. In my opinion, I just found it an interesting, sometimes actually really quite funny. I was surprised at how funny the film is. Matt Dillon, I was surprised that he didn't look older. I thought he would look older, but anyway, he looked fairly good for his age. And he does a great job, stellar job. The rest of the characters are kind of, in some ways the rest of the characters are incidental. I think that's quite a good way of approaching a film like this about a serial killer. And that's the most chilling thing about serial killers, is that everyone's incidental. Everyone is just basically there as characters in their story, and they will use them and abuse them as they see fit. That's scary, and I think that's, in a sense, what the film does very well. So yeah, The House That Jack Built, check it out. It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime, and worth having a look at. Bye.